Welcome back to the Wrong Advice podcast. I'm your host, John Picciuto, and I'm very excited to have my new friend, Dean Hinnant, on the line with us today. Dean, how you doing, buddy?
I'm good, John. Thanks for having me.
No problem, man. I'm super excited to have you on the podcast today. Can you go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, my name's Dean. I'm a photographer. Have been making photos for a few years, but really kind of leaned into it significantly the past year and a half. And yeah, it's just a blast. I really love it. It's been great.
So you and I met on Twitter, which I think is just such a wildly awesome / hilarious thing about life. And we've had the pleasure of speaking in a couple Twitter spaces, which for those listeners who don't know, it's sort of like an chat room, but with people talking, sort of like the Clubhouse version of Twitter. And I was sort of blown away with like a lot of your intentional thoughts on NFT space, on art creation. We just sort of had like a very similar journey into how we kind of became full time photographers. I'm hoping that you can kind of just sort of go through the process of like what led you to this point in your life today. And you know what the journey looked like for you going from, you know, Dean the 18-year-old to Dean the man who's now a full-time photographer.
Okay. Wow. All right. Yeah, I'm totally done to do that. Um, yeah, I never really thought that I would be a photographer growing up. Like as a kid, photography was always a piece of my life. It was a piece of my family. I think like many 90s kids, the sort of Kodak fun saver cameras, the wind up ones, were pretty ever present at family gatherings and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
My great aunt was a photojournalist, and she was sort of I would say the one that took up the mantle of making sure that people were always making photos of things. And so growing up, anytime there was a family gathering, I would help her by photographing things. And then the following event or the next event that we had, whether it was a birthday party or a dinner or whatever, I would get to see the photos from the previous time that we connected or the previous time that relatives got together.
Mm-hmm.
So from like an early age, I developed a link between making photos and, the community of family, relatives, people's lives sort of being connected, even though they don't all live underneath the same roof. And of course, this is looking back on it, at a young age, I wasn't having these epiphanies.
Yeah,
I'm not I don't think I'm a creative genius,
yeah.
or at least I don't want to like falsely label myself one, but yeah, I just in general, I just loved it. Like I've always been a super visual person. And I was always drawn towards reading, writing, books. I didn't like even as a kid, like I never had piles of toys and shit in my bed. It was always books.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've just been a sponge pretty much my whole life. And yeah, so photography was kind of always around. And then I had some life things happen when I was 18, 19. Um, just some stuff that went on, and it was kind of a hard reset for me and who I am. And so I decided, I'm just gonna work. I'm just gonna do something crazy and start traveling for work and make as much money as I can. And I was just trying to bury or like hide away that that obviously, there were some things that had been hurting.
Mm-hmm.
That only worked for a little while. And so what I did when I was 20 was I saved up and went backpacking for 6 months
Oh,
with
sweet.
with a humanitarian organization. And I just felt like I needed to go someplace and do something where I wasn't getting something.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like I needed to not really like cleanse myself or pay penance or something, but I just felt like the best thing to do would be to go and just do something for other people without any real gain.
Mm-hmm.
The experience pretty much being the main thing I would be taking, from their time and from my time. So I backpacked like all around America, all throughout the United States, out in the PNW and the Dakotas and Yellowstone, ended up on the Appalachian Trail for a little while,
Oh,
and then
sweet.
I was in Spain for 8 weeks.
Wow.
And so during this whole process, I was with a group of about 10 or 11 other people, and it was a blast. I was just living off of 20 pounds of supplies on my back. It was absolutely incredible. It was so fun. Um, the only downside, though, was I was very broke.
Yeah.
And like I didn't come from a family where, um, I could just get, in essence, sponsored to have a bunch of things. So I had no camera. Everybody else had cameras. And what was interesting was when the trip ended, uh, I got photos back, but they were everybody else's photos.
Hmm.
And so I have all these folders, these files full of pictures and selfies and all of these things people did, because we all just collectively shared what photos we took. But I was the only person that didn't really take anything.
Because you didn't have
Um,
them.
yeah, I didn't even really have a camera phone with me. So um, it was kind of weird. And I would say it sort of brought back a lot of the old feelings of when I was a kid of like, wow, like I just had this amazing life moment with people. And I actually didn't document it at all. Like I
Hmm.
didn't even make any effort to do that. Um, and so I started thinking, I really should actually be taking more photos. Like I should be making photos. Um,
Do you think your
and it really,
connection to that trip was stronger because you were more into it versus, like I wonder, like the moments in my life that I have such a strong connection with, like that visceral, like full life experience with, and it's very seldom when I'm like with my phone in my hand or like being
mhm.
consciously documenting the moment. So I'm curious if like you think like the separation between yourself and that experience without like the distraction of your iPhone or whatever it might be
Yeah.
gave you a little bit more of a connection to the moments.
I'm sure it did. The reason why the experience was pretty pivotal for me was it was pretty much the first time I'd ever left my hometown, really left even my own state, like of my on my own terms.
Mm.
um, like it wasn't a family trip, it wasn't anything like that, and I come from a large family, so um, in a way, I felt like I had 6 months to actually see myself uh, pretty much on my own terms for the first time.
Uh-huh.
And everybody else was not like in an identical place, but a similar place in life.
Mm-hmm.
We were all in our 20s, mid 20s, late 20s, um, and we all sort of had the same, I think, motivation. Um, we the purpose of it was to find a deeper sense of meaning through living, and doing that also with other people. And so, looking back on it, like I don't regret that. Um, that I spent so much time without a camera.
Mm-hmm.
I think the one thing I do regret though is the majority of my memory of that experience has been shaped, by photos I never made.
Huh.
And so, the human brain is as impressive as it is. We we don't use all of it, and we don't really retain every detail of the experiences we have. Uh, and that's part of, I guess, the reminder I sort of had about photography, the importance of a second, and how much that second can mean, years and years down the road. I just think, you know, photos have a lot of potential to do a lot. And sometimes I don't even think we fully can really appreciate in the moment just how much it will matter.
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't, as humans, have the capacity to see forward into the future or see forward into, um, when the last time is we were with somebody or, um, yeah.
Totally. You're saying, and then that sort of trip pushed you into sort of your photographic journey. Like, talk to me
hmm
about like how quickly after that trip were you like, all right, I need to go buy a camera.
The first thing I did when I got back to the States was I bought an iPhone 4S.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I could not afford a camera, but I knew um, I loved Apple. I had loved Apple iPods and all the other Apple products, and um, I was fascinated by the camera phone or the smartphone they developed. The
Mm-hmm.
smartphones had been around for a while. Android and other devices had cameras on them, but Apple's approach to photography with their devices, um, it just felt so different. Uh, Also, there was a significant advantage to having an iPhone back then because Instagram was made for iPhone. It was developed for iOS,
I did not know
and
that.
yeah, so um, I wanted something to to be able to share photos because a lot of my friends had started to use Instagram, um, and it was like a fun little photo community. Um, but yeah, I had a iPhone for several years, and then it probably wasn't until, gosh, 2014 sometime that I ended up finally getting a camera. And I got a Canon T3.
Oh, nice.
Um, yeah, so my process with using devices was very gradual. It felt very slow, but I just made a ton of photos. Most of it not really with the intention of ever being an artist, because I lacked the confidence even during them to believe that I could actually be an artist or do that in my lifetime.
Why is that?
Um, I think just because of personal reasons, like
Mm-hmm.
um, growing up, I always dealt with anxiety, always dealt with um, just almost unattainable standards that I put over myself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, really being my own worst critic, like far more accepting of other people's faults than mine or flaws. And, to be an artist or to be somebody that makes things, uh, where it's not only just measured by, um, how much it resonates with people, but really before that, before any of that, it's measured by, why you made it, what it means to you, if there's depth to it. And in a lot of my self-teaching of photography, I was uh, avidly consuming photo blogs and watching YouTube videos, from very established photographers talking about their photos. And I was like, there's like all these National Geographic guys, all these Magnum photographers. You know, I felt like there was this massive
Gap.
like channel of water that I would have to swim through before I could ever get to that point.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, so
How much
I
did
just
did any of that ever factor into like the things that you were using to create your work? Because early on, and I think this was like totally irrational on my behalf, but like when I was initially starting off, I was like, well, I'm using like a really shitty camera, right? So I can't be a serious photographer if I'm using a really shitty
oh
camera. Do you
yeah,
ever?
it
Yeah.
totally impacted it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times like I went, I would go to bed thinking, I really just need like a Canon 5D Mark III,
Yeah.
and like if I can get that, then I'll be able to make a good photograph.
It's so
Or
funny how much I can relate to that.
yeah. I think a lot of people went through that, and I think even today, like people still deal with that to some degree because yeah, this is something that can, obviously it's a lot to unpack, but um, there is some like really amazing beauty to the photography community. But one of the aspects of the photography community is that new photographers entering into it, like myself when I entered into it. Um, I felt like somebody going into the gym to lift weights for the first time, and it
Yeah.
was like a CrossFit competition. Um, like I was like, wait, like what? Like there's no way I can do that. Like why am I here? Um, and I think to your point about like imposter syndrome and some other things that we discussed in shorter spaces, like it's very easy to just immediately compare ourselves to other people or
Totally.
compare ourselves to the gear that other people have, and we associate, I would say, the growth or the uniqueness or the personality of that individual based off of what they make,
Mm-hmm.
because I think photography compared to other art forms really is measured pretty heavily on the results of what you get. Um, and I think especially, uh, in talking with other photographers, and you've probably experienced this too, if people are talking about a photo, usually the first questions that come up is technical, like what was this shot at?
Hmm.
What was it shot on? People are always looking for finding ways to like more accurately express themselves visually.
Hmm.
And if something resonates with them, they want to lean into that. And I think I definitely think that, you know, when I was teaching myself photography, and I had a camera that could barely shoot 2 frames a second, it was very easy to tell myself that
It was limiting
the
your,
answer,
yeah,
the answer was to spend more money,
yeah,
um, which it wasn't.
yeah.
But that's
It is funny because
yeah.
that was like one of the first lessons I learned early on. Dude, I cycled through a vast array of gear in like a year. I owned pretty much every camera system you can imagine. Like I went from a
Yeah.
Canon 5D Mark IV to the Fuji X100F to the X Pro 2 to the XT3 to the EOS R to the Leica M6, and like I just for the longest time was struggling with the fact that I couldn't put my finger on what the separation between my tool and my art was. And then it
Hmm.
took like, a year for me to realize it was just me. Like I was putting
Hmm.
myself in the way of my own creativity.
Yeah.
But what a valuable lesson it was to learn, you know, albeit an expensive one. You mentioned
Yeah.
that you early on struggle with confidence and sort of like that imposter syndrome, like, who are you? How are you to start this journey? I'm curious, at what point did that switch for you from a confidence perspective? Like, what about your journey in the field sort of flipped the switch to let you make you feel like you belonged, and what gives you confidence now in your artwork?
Uh, well, when I was in college, uh, I did take one photography course, and my professor was great. He was a nice guy. Uh, he was primarily interested in game design, though,
Hmm.
and uh, his teaching of the photography course, I think, was because the main professor teaching it was um, like just needed an extra class we taken off of his hands or something. So a lot of our like course or coursework was around Photoshop and like a lot of photo manipulation, a lot of photo editing, which was fine, but I never gravitated towards the type of photography where I was, cutting and pasting out entire cityscapes, entire
Same.
um, like almost entire subjects or like entire backgrounds. Um, Not that that's not great or not that it's not photography. It totally is. Um, but again, I was in a very weird corner with where I started the photography to begin with.
Hmm.
I was working with a camera that basically shot a frame a second, and it was not a high resolution camera. So, a lot of photography I did was taking portraits of friends, taking landscape photos whenever we went places. Yeah, I worked 2 jobs to pay for college, so a lot of my free time wasn't exactly free.
Hmm.
I had to always be making money in order to put myself through school, and it paid off. I mean, it did help, but it left very little time for creativity.
Sure.
And so, at some point, uh, I can't remember what it was. I think I got the chance to photograph an event or something, and uh, someone told me that I should put together a website or a portfolio. And eventually, what ended up happening was I got the chance to be one of the 2 photo editors who sort of ran the photo department at the school paper. Um, and it was kind of a crazy gig that I got because I didn't think I would actually get the job.
Hmm.
But I went out on the field and I helped them cover, I think, a baseball game or something, photographed that. And yeah, I got this amazing photo, and I had never used like a Canon, 1D or anything huge like that. But I, I told them that I could handle the tech if they actually put it in my hands and let me show what I could do.
Mm-hmm.
And so they sort of gave me a trial run of, okay, well, here's an assignment, go do this. And I got a photo, even though I'm not an athletic or an athlete photographer or a sports photographer, um, where like the picture and the ball and everything was just completely in focus. It was all tack sharp. And they were like, okay, like, yeah, like this is exactly, what we need, what we want. And so it was a big boost to me because at that point I basically got to help, you know, lead and work with a team of like 15 other students who were in the journalism department.
Oh, cool.
And, we got to talk about photography. We got to teach them how to use cameras. We became sort of, you know, pseudo teachers or like, student teachers, to help other journalism students understand the importance of, how you point a camera, why you point it. Um, and I think really what was cool about it is, it was a school paper, so it wasn't like a high demanding, high pressure publication,
It was a good way to be
you
eased
know,
into it.
like in New York or anything like that. But it really gave me the chance to actually just enjoy an aspect of photography, um, while also growing in the chance to talk with people about everything I'd been teaching myself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and one of the best ways to learn something is to teach it. So, um, yeah, I felt a really, um, tremendous sense of gratitude for that. And I think that was probably when the switch happened. And when I graduated at that point, I was like, I've photographed sporting events, I've photographed people, I've obviously helped other photographers. So there's no reason to say that I um, couldn't do this more, uh, in more of a full-time capacity. And so I started photographing weddings, started photographing some engagements. Um, and in the middle of that, I was in the process of working. Uh, I really wanted to pay down my student loans as much as possible. So,
I feel that.
um, yeah, so I was not spending a lot of money on creative projects or investing into, my creative work, which I think is a regret that I do have, but that's okay, because I've learned from it. Um, yeah, I think the biggest switch, the largest switch that happened with my photography, started a little bit before last summer. Um, when COVID happened, I had a lot going on. I lost my job. I had a lot of things going on in my family. Like my parents were, going through a divorce, and I had friends who unbeknownst to each other, they were from different groups, but they were telling me they were, suicidal. Others told me that they were, and I had other friends telling me that some other life stuff that it really just hits you deep. Like
Mm-hmm.
it was a massive reality check. Um, and in the middle of all of that, all of my camera gear except for my film camera got stolen
Oh shit.
out of my car. Yeah. So, I found myself, back in an industry that I didn't want to be in. And it felt like everything in my life was just a bunch of dumpster fires.
Huh.
Um, and it was rugged, man. Like, I'm not gonna lie. I know people say that, life is difficult and everything, and I mean it is, but um, there was definitely a point where I just wasn't sure what to do about it all.
Yeah, it's
And
like that when everything's compounding like that. You know, I had a very similar experience throughout the pandemic, but when everything's compounding like that, you feel like you're underwater and you're trying to swim to the surface and you're just not sure if you're going to get that breath. You're like, when am I going to get this respite, right? Like, when is this going to all,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I feel that.
Um, so I sort of had this epiphany one day, and I don't know if you've ever seen the movie The Truman Show.
Of
It's an
course.
old Jim Carrey film, but
Yeah.
um, yeah, that whole movie, really symbolized just, what he thought his life was versus what it actually is.
Mm-hmm.
And I had this moment, dude, where uh, I just looked in the mirror and I was like, what am I doing? I think I had like a really bad panic attack or something, and it just after that, I got to the point where I was like, "There's something off. Like, there's clearly a piece of me that I'm not actually like fostering. There's a piece of me that I'm not uh, growing.
Hmm.
There's something in my life that's um, that needs to be opened up." And I I came to the conclusion that really that's because for years I had wanted to really push towards working full time in a creative capacity. Using photography to ultimately lead into also doing short films, and in my mind, I had a very clear idea of who I wanted to be, and the reality check I received was that those ideas were amazing and those ideas were great. But when it came time to actually backing up what I was doing to actually work towards that,
Hmm.
um, I found that I was basically scared. And that fear really, I think, was just because um, there were a lot of other things going on in my life that felt like justifications for why something, couldn't be invested into or something shouldn't be invested into. Um, and I'm sure you, to some degree, like as a photographer, have probably dealt with the same thing.
Totally.
In our conversations, it sounds like you have. And I know anybody listening to this who's a photographer, like probably will be like, wow, yeah, like I've totally been there. And yeah, it was pretty daunting. But I decided the best thing to do was essentially take a risk, and not just take a risk, but take a risk of doing something that usually I would just rationalize away as not being possible. And so I saved up money, and I regained my camera gear back. I got some replacement gear. It wasn't all of it, but it was enough. And yeah, I left Virginia, and because that's my home state, home area, and I lived out on my Jeep for 5 months, and I just photographed the United States. And the whole premise to the creative project was essentially to show the reemergence of people, um, the reemergence of daily life, the reemergence of basically human activity, human interaction, human everything.
Hmm.
Um, and a lot of that was because I felt there was a narrative in my life uh, that needed to be explored and shared. And I knew, with as much as COVID had done to my communities and my life circumstances and all of that, that it obviously had an equal or even greater reaction or impact on other people's lives.
Hmm.
And so, yeah,
That's
that
pretty.
that was kind of
That's pretty fucking cool. I mean, I had an extremely similar situation. I was working a regular job. I work for a real estate developer. I got laid off in August of 2020. Had
yeah,
a full blown panic attack, anxiety attack, identity crisis. Who am I? What am I doing with my life? Like, I'm 34 years old, 30, whatever it was 2 years ago. And I just like had a massive collapse in like my identity of who I was.
hmm,
And I had an extremely similar experience. I literally packed my Jeep. I went on the road for 30 something days, drove around
that's
the
crazy.
country. Yeah, it's so fucking funny, man. I drove around the country for about a month. I took hundreds of rolls. I think I shot like 100 and something rolls of film,
Hmm.
and like found myself. Like, I know it's so cheesy and cliche to say, and it's like the most fucking cliche thing on earth, but like I figured out what the important things in my life were. It wasn't like a job, it wasn't a status, it wasn't a car, a house, a watch, a thing that I can look, point to that is like my status of success in life. It was finding a path that filled me up both like emotionally and like creatively. And when
Hmm.
you go through what the world has gone through over the course of the last 2 years, you put into context the things that are important. It's like your friend's health, your family's health, and your own health. Like, happiness and health are the only important things in life because they're the only things that matter. If you're not happy,
Hmm.
you're going to be miserable. It's not going to matter whether you're making $2 million a year or $20 a year. And if you're not healthy, like, it's hard to live a happy existence if you don't have your own health. And I think while dealing with all those emotional aspects of what transpired in August of 2020 and into September for myself, the growth that I've experienced over that time period has been the single most rewarding thing in my life.
Yeah.
I often ask myself if 25-year-old John could have learned the lessons of 35-year-old John. And I'm curious if you've ever considered the same fact, right? So, like Dean 2 years ago to Dean 10 years ago, do you think Dean 10 years ago could have learned the lessons that Dean 2 years ago learned?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, I actually I used to imagine sometimes meeting a past version of myself or a future version of myself and what those interactions would be. That sounds totally narcissistic, but I promise it's not. It's just, um, yeah. I mean, I, I spend so much time thinking that it can almost be like having like a 12-cylinder motor in a car that really needs a four.
Yeah.
It can be a lot at times, and you know, I definitely would say that that was a crutch that I used in my late teens, early 20s, where it's like, oh my gosh, I have so much to think about, or oh, it's in like really, I mean, I think that in total honesty, there was a lot that just was outside of my control, and um, for whatever reason, I either believed that I was to blame for that, or it was somehow my duty and responsibility to be in charge of that.
Hmm.
And coming from like a big family and being the oldest of six kids, I think a lot of that really just came into the fact that there were a lot of times when I was younger where um, I had to be more than just, a kid in the family.
Mm-hmm.
There were times that I had to, be something that really didn't suit my age. And so I think that what that did was it just, in my mind, it almost like preemptively aged me.
Mm.
Like I remember being 16, 17, and people telling me that I thought and talked like a 40-year-old. And I mean, it was weird, but like to a certain degree, it's just because I
Life
definitely had
experiences.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude. I don't need to trauma dump or go into all of that on here, but just because everybody has stuff that they've been through. Um, my experiences aren't special because some of them were negative, but um,
But they are who make you
yeah,
you.
they are what make me. They are some of the ingredients that got put in the bowl, and yeah, I think that what I would probably tell myself, uh, just maybe at the age of 15 or 16, um, was just that it's okay to be your age. Um, it's okay to not actually have everything figured out,
Oh yeah.
and the pressure to have everything figured out is not uh, actually a pressure that you need to have um,
Ever.
in order to be happy.
Yeah.
You know,
I'm so
it's
glad
just
you
not needed.
I'm so glad you said that because like for me, a lot of my life has been about that, right? It's like you go to high school and get good grades, so you go to college and get good grades, so you can get a good job and a nice house and a good car and a marriage and a white picket fence and 2.5 kids and like all these things that
Hmm.
like I never really
Hmm.
stopped to consider. I have none of them in what is the perfect situation for me, right? Like
Yeah.
I think like so much of my 20s were spent trying to pretend to be something that I wasn't, that I never stopped to think that it's okay to not know what I want to be or who I want to be or what I want to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. I have a lot of friends that had dealt with similar things. And I will say just the close friends I have, pretty much are the reason why I'm the person I am today. I
Hmm.
can't even tell you, dude, how grateful I am for, and if they hear this, they know who they are. Those people are literally the reason that that I'm not just just dry bones inside.
Mm.
Um, I am so grateful for the people I have, and yeah, I definitely think that like in my 20s, a lot of what I dealt with, and a lot of what I'm sort of finding that I'm having to handle the repercussions and the consequences of is that there were a lot of things in my 20s that I didn't need to be doing.
Hmm.
But out of some form of emotional hook or some form of uh, unspoken expectation, there was this sense of duty that I had to be around and um, to be something for other people that I didn't really need to be. And the watershed moment of that was when, um, like during COVID and everything, I came to the realization that like I couldn't handle everything, and the reason why I couldn't handle everything was because a lot of what I was handling wasn't actually, um, in my life. It was not something that was specifically something within my scope of control.
Mm.
Um, and I never really thought that I had a control problem. Uh, I've never been OCD or anything like that. Um, but I've always been the person that would get a phone call 2 in the morning. I was always the person that um, one of my parents would talk to about problems when really in reality they didn't need to be doing that. Um, and that's not a criticism of them. That's just, one of the aspects
It's just a
of,
fact.
yeah, of how things happen and how life happens. Um,
I think the
and
greatest realization I had in life is like realizing that like right now I'm the same age my parents were when they had me, and like
yeah,
how woefully unprepared I am for that life. So it's like whenever you start reaching those like milestones at ages in your life where you start realizing that the other people who went through these things were feeling the same way we were, it puts into
hmm
context like how other people's, traumas and other people's insecurities make sense because it's the
hmm
commonality of man. It's like how we may walk different paths. We may be white, black, yellow, green, orange, blue, gay, straight, whatever. But the truth of the matter is, we're all still just trying to figure this fucking thing out the best that we can, the best that we know how.
yeah, um, that is a huge reason why when I have been in like photography discussions, I take the sort of optimistic stance that I do, and it's something that either is really well received or is immediately criticized. um, because
Big shocker in life.
yeah, well, you've heard me say it before, and I've unpacked it a few different times, but like generally my outlook at the moment, and it might change when I turn 40, but um, my outlook at the moment is that we really actually haven't seen the best days of photography yet.
Mm.
Um, and that, as a photographer, like as a creative person, so much of what we make and what we share, even if we get told that photographs don't need to have meaning or they don't need to have any type of, human factor to them, they do, because every photo is made by a person. So um, I really believe that there's a extremely like an immensely bright future for photography and for visual content. Um, and I really like am leery or eerie to um, hesitant to say like photography is content. But I think that
Yeah.
the primary ways that I believe people are going to consume photography for the near future and the somewhat near future is it's going to be on content related platforms.
Hmm.
Um, that's just how it will be mass consumed. But yeah, I struggle with believing that the days of photography have sort of passed us by because photography has barely been around for 2 centuries, and even out of those 2 centuries, if you were asked um, to name uh, you know, 100 great photographers, you could probably pick some. But then
Hmm.
if you were told to name 100 great photographers from Cambodia, or if you were told to name 100 like iconic photographers from China, if you were told to do any of that, most people wouldn't really actually be able to. And
Hmm.
I think that's because as a community online right now, a lot of what we experience about the photography community is very rooted in, America, Europe, parts of Asia, um, parts of South America too. Uh, but really, just with everything going on in tech and with platforms and the way that people are starting to, uh, use creativity and the creator economy is opening up. Um, man,
Based on
I,
that statement, I'm curious what your relationship is like with social media. So very early on in my creative career, I was like social media obsessed. If I wasn't getting a certain number of likes on something or a
mhm.
certain number of followers per week or whatever, if I wasn't getting posted on a feature account, I was deeming the things that I was doing as a failure because I was putting a lot of stock in what the social media validation said about my work. So I'm curious
Yeah.
what your relationship is like with social media.
So, um, I I used to use Instagram when I was originally sort of growing in photography as a way to connect with artists who I felt like I could actually access.
Hmm.
Meaning that if you went on the National Geographic website, you would not be able to just read the comments and explore how people are discussing Steve McCurry's work.
Hmm.
You could see articles, you could watch workshops, you could do all of those things. But those are more traditional avenues for being able to understand an artist and
Hmm.
get to engage with an artist, right? Social media took all that away. Social media made it where um, even if it's a manager running their account, you could not only see the photo and see the conversation around the photo, you could actually participate in it. You could engage in it.
Hmm.
And so for me, it was definitely a learning tool. Uh, the sort of shadow side to that is I think myself, among many other photographers, started to associate photography um, as basically what they were consuming on Instagram or what they were consuming on Facebook. And it really compacted, I think, the definition of how we or it compacted how we defined photography.
Hmm.
Um, like, I mean, if you said Canon 5D Mark III, 35, 1.4 EF, you could just envision, somebody in the Pacific Northwest, using a very, very low contrast filter. You can just see the really dark, almost emerald green trees, and maybe it's that really iconic rope bridge that went from one side to the next,
Hmm.
and it looked otherworldly. Like there were clearly people that were all channeling and growing um, social media at that time in a similar way, and I think that that's cool. But I think that now my relationship with social media is different because um, I stopped looking at it as those were, in essence, the definitions of what photography was, and I started to look at that as just the early days and the early phases um, of photography being able to essentially uh, grow
Hmm.
and become itself online. Um, so if you look at any human system, right, or any point in human history, and we talk about what things were versus what they are now, you can look at the Industrial Revolution, and when people were developing, steam engines, nobody would have thought we would have electric cars that can go 0 to 60 in 3 seconds.
Yeah.
Nobody was considering that, right?
Hmm.
Um, Photography is no different because really, what I'm starting to do is really lean into like the sort of human component of this, which is that um, 10 to 15 years ago, I don't think you and I would actually be having this podcast because of the fact that we were able to be in a space discussing photography when that space really was in reaction to the startup of another place called Clubhouse.
Hmm.
And
I mean, 5
Clubhouse
years ago, we
was,
wouldn't have had this
yeah, I
conversation.
mean, and Clubhouse was a reaction to the lack of free and open discussion that people could have about things online. And so it's like, without driving yourself crazy, you can find all of those different dots and try to connect them and be like, geez, like that's nuts.
Hmm.
Um, but humans complicate things. Like
Totally.
we always start something simple so that it can be very easily understood.
Hmm.
And then from that point on, it continues to expand. Um, so I think of social media and photography going forward is not going to look the way that it has. I don't think that you're going to see it being defined as heavily by people who have significant followings or in the top 100. I think that it's going to really explore and blow up in terms of actual community.
Mm.
Um, and how I'm finding that in my own life and what I'm doing now is, uh, even though I'm still trying to get good at doing it 100% of the time, if someone follows me, I send them a message. I say, hey, thanks for following me. Always open to talk about photography. Like, appreciate you seeing my work. I love your work as well. I try to open conversations, even if other people aren't interested, um, because I think that's a really key aspect of why any of us are doing this.
Totally.
Um, even if it's a photographic goal to make a book instead of shooting a campaign for Audi. We all have a reason for why we resonate with
Hmm.
this type of art.
Oh yeah.
So,
I think it's cool because, so I've moved beyond this sort of love-hate relationship that I have with social media, and now it's like a place that I go to get inspired, right? Like I love seeing, people that I've now consider a friend, like you, our mutual friend Tyler James, a guy who I met on Instagram a few years ago. It's cool how I can look at the artworks of people who are everyday photographers like you and me to like you mentioned, Steve, uh, McCurry, I forget his name. Yeah,
yep.
yeah. For shooting for Nat Geo, who's got tens of millions of followers and doing incredible work. It's a place that can inspire me to create. And what's nice is like these conversations that I have in these Twitter spaces on my podcast with other creators. It's just filling, right? Like it fills my
hmm
cup up with that like creative juice and that creative push that I need to go out and make my own work, which has been awesome. So I'm curious in terms of your own photography, from going out on a Monday afternoon, Monday morning to go create work, like what inspires you? Who inspires you? Like what makes you get out of bed in the morning to go make pictures?
Um, okay. Quick question on that. So, when you're saying who inspires me and what inspires me, are you looking for, people I look up to, or is it more of like an internal thing? How do
Both.
you
Both.
both? Okay. Um, well, I will say internally, um, I think that my biggest motivation with making photos is, uh, I really enjoy being alive.
Me
That
too.
sounds so, yeah, I mean, like that sounds so basic. And it's like, wow, like I'm glad, Dean, but no, I really do. I'm grateful for every day that I have. Uh, and I can tell you, I don't really know if I would have been able to come to a place of realizing that unless I had been in a position where um, I had to question if I would have friends in my life again. Um, it's fascinating how moments in your life can really realign your thinking,
Mm-hmm.
um, and without like sounding like I beat myself up all the time, there's now this internal piece of me that didn't used to speak very loudly, and it it usually now is along the saying something along the lines of like, you have today, uh, you had yesterday, you had the day before that, um, but right now you pretty much have today. Like, you really only have today. Um, and that's really been the biggest push for me, which is that if for some reason something happened, or if I didn't get the chance to live to a very old age, uh, what would in essence be the the story or the version of my life that people shared?
Hmm.
How would it be talked about? Um, Not in a way to sort of memorialize myself, um, but I think the reason why all of us have uh, the ability to grow as people is because the stories and the lives of others have been able to shape us and really guide us. And I think that we very often unconsciously are moved and influenced by things in our lives, even when we don't think that we really are.
Hmm. I love
Um,
that.
and so, yeah, if I'm out making photos, it's because I know it's something I love to do. If I'm out doing something creative, it's because I know it's what I love to do and it's what I enjoy doing and it's who I am. It doesn't mean that I need to um, photograph for a brand in order to have a sense of value. It also doesn't mean that I can't photograph for a brand because it, pains me at the soul of my being or anything like that. No, it's a lot more holistic, and I think that there are a lot of photographers who have inspired me. More and more, my inspiration is coming from people that uh, are almost in a similar place that I am. Folks who are, less established, but like very clearly um, are kind of having a similar epiphany in their life of realizing what they love and why they're doing it. Um, and it's just so cool. There's a laundry list of people I could mention, um, but yeah, it's really great.
That's
Um,
awesome. Yeah, I think
yeah.
it's. I think I came to this creative life late in life, right? It's funny how you're talking about taking pictures at family parties. Like when we cleared my parents' house out, 6 months ago when they sold their home, I found all of these sort of point and shoot, wind up cameras like you were mentioned that I shot like when I was in like fifth, sixth grade, like school trips, all these things. So there was like always an affinity for photography. There was always me taking pictures that I guess somewhere in 12 to 14 I lost, right? You start playing sports,
Hmm.
you start getting distracted by school, and I lost that, and I came back to it so late in life, and it's been one of the most incredible things because I'm seeing life differently and my life is better for that. And
Hmm.
I think a lot of times in life, it's very easy for people to get stuck in a groove, stuck in a position where they don't feel like they have the opportunity to change things about themselves or what they're doing.
Yeah.
And what I've been blessed with is the opportunity through trauma, right? Losing my job, not a great situation, been able to be sort of like reborn into this new life that I'm thankful for each and every day, which is pretty incredible. I like to spend the last bit of every podcast doing sort of like a Q&A. Some of the questions are super easy. Some are a little in depth. First thing or a couple things that come to mind. Yeah. So first question, what is your favorite book?
Favorite book. Oh my God. Oh my gosh. I have to pick a favorite book.
You could pick a couple.
All right, yeah. In high school, my favorite book was The Great Gatsby.
Yeah. Nice.
Um, yeah, I think if I could pick a book, um, a photo book, even though it's gonna sound like a total fanboy moment, I really actually loved uh, NYC I Love You, which was
Oh
Joe
yeah.
Greer's first photo
I,
book
I
that
have
he
that as
made.
well.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful photographs. Really, really cool. Um, if I could pick a book, I think that probably meant the most to me, even though it'll sound a little dorky at first, is there was an old comic called Calvin and Hobbes,
Hmm.
written by a guy named Bill Watterson. And the last book that was ever made of his work was called It's a Magical World. And yeah, that was a really special thing for me growing up, like as a kid. And so I think like if I could have a few, those would probably be the three books I would want to have.
I like that. Favorite movie?
Favorite movie is The Secret Life of Ultimate.
Dude, that's one
Yes.
of mine too.
Yeah.
Not enough people have
Yeah,
seen that movie.
dude, I went to the theaters and saw that thing, and I hadn't even seen the trailer. Well, I think I saw part of the trailer, but I didn't even know what the movie was about. I'd been told that it was a remake of some old character or something. I was
Hmm.
like, all right, but I mean, it's Ben Stiller, and it looks like he goes to Iceland. That's kind of cool. So, um, dog, I like cried at the end of that movie.
It is. I
I
watch that movie. I want to say, I'm not going to say every week, but once or twice a month, I watch that movie. When I need a pick me
Yeah.
up, when I need something to sort of like light me up, I watch that movie.
Yeah.
It is beautiful
Um,
storytelling. It is cinematically beautiful, and it is so relatable that it's
oh my
shocking
God.
how many times I have this
Yeah.
conversation with people. They're
So
like, "I've never seen it."
Ben Stiller and Sean Penn's characters, I'm not gonna ruin the moment for people who haven't seen it, but the moment when they interact with each other towards the end of the film and the conversation they have, I just remember being in the theater and thinking, this is literally two halves of my brain talking right now. Like I could resonate with both of them. And I just saw, I just received so much inspiration from that
Dude,
movie.
I fucking
Yeah.
love that. What's your favorite
Yeah.
food?
Favorite food. Um, pizza's great. Um, I also really like Indian curry.
Mm.
Uh, so like masala, which probably I guess out of like Indian food is probably the more stereotypical one you order, but um, in up in the mountains in North Carolina, there's this Indian restaurant near where some of my relatives live, and it's a small mountain town, but they do amazing food, and they have a tikka masala, but they make it with like smoked salmon
Oh,
instead of chicken, and that's incredible.
that
Yeah,
sounds
that's
good.
life changing food right there. Yeah,
Huh, yeah, that sounds good. Do you
yeah,
believe in an afterlife?
absolutely. Yeah,
Dude, it's
yeah.
crazy. So I've been asking that question 60 something times now. I'm going on like 90+% of people saying that they think so. And I got to tell you, that's super reassuring for mankind for me, and something that makes me genuinely happy. Speaking of happy, are you happy?
Am I happy? Um, I would say that generally, yes. I think
Can't ask for much
that
more.
no, you can't. Um, I think that so this, I mean, this could make your podcast go on an hour, and I don't want to, I don't want to do that to you, but I don't think we're supposed to be happy 100% of the time.
Oh, no, I agree.
I don't, yeah, I don't think humans are given a spectrum of emotion to then only use one of them.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so that's a whole other thing, but
Sure.
yeah, yeah.
What's your biggest fear?
Oh my God, biggest fear. Um, so my biggest fear, uh, I used to be very afraid of uh, deep water. I used to have, I almost drowned as a kid,
Hmm.
and so that happened when I was like 4 or 5. I like fell into the deep end of the pool, and I couldn't get back out. And some of my cousins ended up getting me out of the pool. But after that, I sort of had this weird relationship with water. Like I loved
Understandable.
swimming and stuff. But yeah, deep water that I could see to the bottom of, no issue. Deep water that I couldn't see the bottom of, that was yeah, that
Terrifying.
was freezing. So um, yeah, I would say that yeah, it's gotten better over the years, definitely.
Good.
Um, but yeah, I also think that a small piece of that fear was linked to like fear of the unknown, fear of what I don't know.
Hmm.
Uh,
Totally.
being an overthinker, that can definitely have some symbolism in your dreams.
Oh,
So
for sure.
yeah,
What's your biggest dream?
my biggest dream. Um, My biggest dream. I think my biggest dream would be to uh, pretty much become the best version of myself that I can.
Oh, I
Um,
fucking love that.
Not, yeah. If you had asked me a few years ago, I probably would have told you, oh, I want to be the next so and so, or I want to be the next this person. Um, and I've leaned more and more into accepting that those people have already existed, or they do already exist, and I don't really need to become them in order to actually become the best thing I can be.
Oh,
Um, yeah, nobody else is going to be able to say that they were Dean.
mm-hmm.
Um, and it's cool because it means I have an exclusive on something. Um, but it's funny. I was actually talking to a fellow photographer about this in Seattle. His name's Vince Perry. He's awesome. And well, really, the conversation sort of came up because of we were talking about the expectations that the creative community has on well-known photographers and well-known creators. And I, as weird as this sounds, I just feel like the expectations that people have on them are too high.
Mm-hmm.
Like that sounds weird, but I think there's so much pressure and so much desire from people to um, to be into the community, to be with the community of a well-known photographer or with a well-known artist, and there's obviously this hunger for people to have that connection and that community, right? But really, I think what's behind that is really people want to accept themselves without, and that might be a hot take that some people don't
No,
like,
no,
but
I agree completely.
um, yeah, I think that everybody who's an artist at some point goes through a period where they model or they emulate someone in a act of trying to really break down and come to the best definition of who they are. And yeah, so I think that really if I have one dream, it's I want to be the best of myself that I can be.
Nah,
Um,
I love that, man.
yeah.
I mean, that's a good one to have for sure.
Yeah.
What's the best piece of advice someone's ever given you?
Oh my gosh, dude, your questions. Let's see. Best piece of advice I ever got. I'm trying to think. Uh, I think the best piece of advice that someone ever gave me um, was you have time.
Hmm.
Um, because for a while I thought that um, based off of, not really applying myself the way that I should have when I was younger, or the way um, that I failed to, actually commit to becoming like like what I wanted to be, basically being all talk and no action.
Hmm.
Um, I think the best piece of advice someone ever gave me was I have time, because there was definitely a period of my life where I felt that I had so many, in a sense, steps that I had to take in order to keep up with where everybody else was at. Um, there was definitely uh, a piece of me for a while that thought, oh my gosh, like I'm just not going to be able to do all this. Like I'm going to get too old, or I'm going to this, or I'm going to that. But um, yeah, failure is probably the the thing that I am most grateful for, and that's because I know exactly what doesn't work, and I know what doesn't uh, what what's not getting me anywhere. Um, and I think that being able to know that I have time means I also have time to make the mistakes to end up where I want to be. So,
Dude, I fucking love that. That is a
thanks, man.
wildly important sentiment that I don't think enough people
Yeah.
can relate to. Last
Yeah.
last question is, what is one recommendation you have for something that you've recently consumed? Can be like a podcast, a TV show, a movie, a book, just something that you've recently consumed that you want everyone listening today to check out.
Um, I think dude, I'm sorry. I have a lot of things going through my head.
Pick
Let's see,
one, two,
one thing.
anything.
Da, 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 da. Let's see. Well, I will preemptively tell you to just go see the new Batman movie, because that's going to be the absolute best Batman film that's ever been made.
Oh,
Um,
how can you say that when you saw Dark Knight Rises?
because, nah, man, because Matt Reeves has already said that this Batman is essentially going to be, if Kurt Cobain was a superhero locked in an old house.
Whoa.
And
Okay. I like that.
yeah,
I'd
I
fuck with that. All right.
as a '90s kid, man, he just mentioned the Godfather of grunge music, and I'm there. But um, I would say that definitely, because even though superhero movies have been bombarding the box office, I think it'll be very original and very good.
Hmm.
Um, Past that, I would say um, the best thing that people could consume would be, um, well, if they're photographers, to actually go back to some of the very first photos they ever took, and and look at what those were versus where they are now. I think it's really healthy to go back and not live in the past, um, but to recognize it. Because we will spend the majority of our lives in the present moment. And that present moment is both being informed by the past that we've lived in, and it's also unconsciously being guided by where we think the future is. And um, I think it's really healthy, for creative people, even if they're not a photographer. Maybe they're a music writer. Maybe they've never made anything yet, or they think they haven't made anything yet.
Maybe they're
But
nobody,
just
but
go
it does help to look back to go forward.
totally,
Yeah.
yeah. And just pour a glass of wine or a cracked beer. Just spend 20, 30 minutes on that, and just look at it. Um, and uh, I think you'll be surprised, or they will be surprised at how much growth they've made. And I think it's important to recognize that. So
I like that. Dean, I say this often and cheesy enough, but if you've been on my podcast, you're part of my family. I'm super appreciative of you spending an hour with me this morning. I think you're an incredibly intentional, intelligent, thoughtful human being, and I've just enjoyed our chat so very much. And I'm super, super thankful that you spent the time with me here this morning on the podcast. So thank you so much for coming on.
yeah, John, this was a blast. Thank you so much for having me, dude.
No problem. Take care.
All right, peace.